said, and again, he is no idiot, but this theory that she was kidnapped or killed in another location and the perp came back to stage the scene to make us think it happened there, it flies in the face of all the physical evidence. You've got to follow the physical evidence, like the blood, like the pacemaker.
I'll defer to Cheryl McCollum and Joe Scott on the forensic side, but what I'll add is someone like Dr. Bricado provides such supporting fires for someone like me in the field. And I'll explain this. An investigator can get locked into a certain hypothesis, a certain theory, right? And where you bring in somebody like Dr. Bricado to present these potential hypotheses, yeah, maybe the forensic evidence shoots it down quickly. Maybe it takes a day or two to shoot it down, but it gives another angle for the investigation to look at. And sometimes that creates a breakthrough, right? Because I can say for myself, sometimes I'll get locked into one hypothesis or theory versus another. And someone like that presenting, hey, there's someone controlling this from afar, 1 foot soldier on the ground executing the abduction, right? These are things that might get missed.
And we know tonight that, quote, fresh eyes have been brought in, Fitzgibbons, to take a fresh look at the evidence all over again. And I got to tell you something, Fitz. I'd be stuck in my office at the district attorney's office in downtown Atlanta, and it'd be 8 o'clock at night. I'd be looking at the same thing over and over. And then my investigator, Ernest, we were together over 10 years, only had one fight in 10 years over that POS O.J. Simpson. That said, he'd walk in.
At 1:27, Nancy was presumably still in her home. By 2009, something had happened that caused her medical device to stop functioning. The question that haunts everyone working this case is simple and terrible. What happened in that 1 hour window? Was the device physically removed from Nancy's body? Was she taken from her home during that hour? Did someone use electronic jamming equipment to block the signal? Or does the disconnection mean something far worse? That Nancy's heart, the fragile heart that device was monitoring, simply stopped beating. By morning, Nancy Guthrie was gone. No sign of forced entry, no obvious struggle, no witnesses who saw anything suspicious. Just an empty home and an 84-year-old woman who desperately needed her medication vanished. When Annie Guthrie discovered her mother was missing, she did what any daughter would do. She called the police. She called family. She called neighbors. And then she did something that would prove invaluable to the investigation. She created a map. Annie knew the area. She knew the routes. She knew which roads led where and which paths someone might take if they were trying to avoid main intersections. Using that knowledge, she mapped out what she believed was the most likely route someone would take when leaving her mother's neighborhood. Then she shared that map with a neighborhood group chat, asking anyone along that route to check their security cameras. It was proactive, it was smart, and it might be the key to solving this case. The route Annie identified runs through both residential areas and commercial zones. It passes Lulu Walker Elementary School, a building surrounded by surveillance cameras positioned at every corner. It goes past Green Toes North Nail Salon and Massage, which has a clearly visible security camera mounted at the front of the building, positioned to capture both the parking lot and the street. It winds past gas stations, pharmacies, libraries and businesses, each with their own security systems. In theory, anyone traveling that route in the early morning hours of January 31st should have been captured on multiple cameras. The timestamp would narrow down exactly when each camera was triggered. The 3 a.m. hour is typically quiet, with minimal traffic. A vehicle moving through that corridor at that time should stand out, should be identifiable, should provide investigators with the single most important piece of evidence they need, the vehicle description. But 80 days into this investigation, no vehicle has been publicly identified, and that absence has created one of the most baffling paradoxes of this entire case. How is it possible that in an area saturated with security cameras, at a time when traffic is minimal, with a specific route mapped out and a narrow time window established, law enforcement still hasn't identified a suspect vehicle. There are several possibilities, and none of them are comforting. The first possibility is that the perpetrator knew about those cameras and deliberately avoided them. The area around Fountain Hills includes stretches of open desert. It's possible to bypass major intersections by cutting through undeveloped land. A vehicle could potentially navigate around camera coverage by taking these alternate routes. If someone spent weeks studying the area, they would know where the cameras were and how to avoid them. The second possibility is more technical. Surveillance cameras fail. They malfunction. They run out of storage space. They're pointed in the wrong direction or have blind spots. It's possible that at the critical moment, Nancy Guthrie was being transported through that area. The cameras that should have captured the vehicle simply weren't recording. The third possibility is that the footage exists but hasn't been found yet. Investigators have stated publicly that they're reviewing thousands of hours of video from both public and private sources. That process is painstaking and slow. Every camera angle has to be checked. Every timestamp has to be verified. Every vehicle has to be tracked and eliminated or investigated. In a case this complex, it could take months to review everything. And then there's the fourth possibility, the one that investigators don't like to discuss but can't ignore. What if the vehicle never traveled that route at all? What if Annie's map, as logical and well-reasoned as it is, doesn't match the actual path the perpetrator took? What if Nancy Guthrie was taken in a completely different direction? But even if the suspect avoided every fixed camera position in the area, there's one source of potential evidence that's harder to escape. The vehicles that were on the road that night. When Nancy's son-in-law drove her home in that blue Honda CR-V, technology was recording. Modern vehicles, especially models like the CR-V, are equipped with systems that track everything. Navigation data logs every turn. Black box recorders capture speed, braking, acceleration. Electronic systems record when doors open, when windows lower, when the vehicle shifts from park to drive. Annie Guthrie's blue Honda CR-V was impounded by investigators. The reason wasn't publicly disclosed immediately, which led to speculation. But anyone familiar with modern vehicle forensics understands exactly why that car became evidence. The data inside that vehicle could answer crucial questions. Did the CR-V move again after dropping Nancy off? Did any doors open after the initial drop-off? What route did it take? How fast was it traveling? Where did it stop? Most importantly, that vehicle was on the road during the exact time window when Nancy's abductor would have been positioned in the neighborhood. If the CR-V has forward-facing cameras, and many modern vehicles do, those cameras might have captured other vehicles in the area. A car parked where it shouldn't be. A vehicle following at a distance. Anything out of the ordinary. But there's another vehicle that's even more important. The Uber. Earlier that evening, before Nancy went to Annie's house, she was picked up by an Uber driver and taken to her daughter's home. This was routine for Nancy, who couldn't drive herself. But that Uber ride has now become a critical piece of the investigation, because that driver's vehicle might contain the last footage of Nancy Guthrie before her abduction. Depending on what type of vehicle the Uber driver was using, there could be multiple camera angles. Many rideshare drivers install dashboard cameras for their own protection, recording both the road ahead and the passenger compartment. Some vehicles, particularly Teslas, which are popular among Uber drivers, have 360-degree camera coverage. What could those cameras tell us? First, and most importantly, they would show Nancy's condition and demeanor. Was she coherent? Did she appear ill or distressed? Was she wearing the same clothes she would later be wearing when she disappeared? These might seem like small details, but in an investigation, every detail matters. Second, those cameras would capture the route taken and the exact timing. Investigators could verify where the Uber picked up Nancy and what path it took to Annie's house. More crucially, they could see what else was on the road during that trip. But the most valuable potential evidence from that Uber ride might not be Nancy at all. It might be what the cameras captured in the background, the periphery, the vehicles parked along the route. Because if someone was already stalking Nancy, already planning her abduction, they might have been in position even before she left her house. A parked vehicle near her residence, a car that appeared multiple times in the area over several days. Anything that doesn't fit the normal pattern of that neighborhood. Federal investigators are now reviewing that Uber footage with what officials are calling fresh eyes. That phrase is significant. It suggests that the footage was examined before, but that new analysts are looking at it again with different priorities, different questions, and different technological tools for enhancement. Video enhancement technology has advanced dramatically. What might have been a dark blur in the corner of a frame 5 years ago can now be clarified, enhanced, and analyzed. License plates that were unreadable can sometimes be recovered. Vehicle makes and models that were indistinct can be identified. Even the color of a vehicle, which can appear very different under streetlights, can be color-corrected to show its true shade. This is the same kind of technological analysis that helped crack other high-profile cases. When 4 University of Idaho students were murdered in their home, investigators eventually identified suspect Brian Koberger, partly through vehicle evidence. His white Hyundai Elantra was captured on multiple cameras in the area, but what really damaged his defense was a DoorDash delivery driver who placed him at the scene at 4 in the morning, exactly when the murders occurred. In the Molly Tibbetts case, a young woman who vanished while jogging in Iowa, the break came from surveillance footage that captured a vehicle circling the area. That vehicle had distinctive markings along its side. Enhancement of that footage led investigators to the killer's car, and ultimately to the killer himself. When Caitlin Armstrong murdered professional cyclist Mariah Wilson in Austin, Texas, it was surveillance video of Armstrong's SUV circling the area before the murder that helped establish her guilt. The vehicle appeared again and again in footage from different cameras, creating a pattern that couldn't be explained away. And in one of the most famous examples of vehicle data solving a murder, Alex Murdaugh's own SUV testified against him. The vehicle's black box recorded everything. His speed leaving the crime scene where he had just murdered his wife and son. The moment he slowed down to throw his wife's phone out the window, the electronic lowering of the passenger window. Every detail preserved in data, impossible to deny. The common thread in all these cases is simple. Vehicles don't lie. People lie. They create alibis. They misremember or deliberately obscure the truth. But vehicles record data without bias, without agenda, without concern for who might be incriminated. And that data, once properly analyzed, can be devastating. Which brings us back to the central question haunting the Nancy Guthrie investigation. If vehicles are this valuable as sources of evidence, if camera coverage in the area is this extensive, if the time window is this narrow and the traffic this light, why hasn't a suspect vehicle been identified? Investigators who've spoken about the case have acknowledged the frustration. One specialist noted that after 80 days, with all the intersection cameras, gas station footage, church security systems, and business surveillance in the area, there should be a vehicle. The absence of one suggests either extraordinary planning or extraordinary luck. But there's another element to consider. The desert. Fountain Hills sits in the Sonoran Desert of Arizona. It's a beautiful area, known for its dramatic landscapes and the world's 4th tallest fountain. But from an investigative standpoint, that desert terrain presents unique challenges. Between developed areas, there are stretches of open land, undeveloped lots, paths that aren't quite roads, but are passable by vehicle. Someone familiar with the area could potentially navigate between neighborhoods without using main streets, without passing through monitored intersections, without triggering the cameras that investigators are depending on. This exactly what one investigator noted when discussing the case. She had personally visited the area and observed that at almost any point, a driver could make a hard turn and cut through sections of desert, avoiding cameras entirely. The landscape is vast and open enough to allow that kind of movement. If Nancy Guthrie's abductor took advantage of that terrain, it would explain why no vehicle has been identified. It would also suggest an even higher level of planning than initially suspected, because avoiding cameras requires knowing where they are. And knowing where they are requires reconnaissance, which brings us full circle to those earlier sightings. The figure captured on video on January 11th. The return visits in the days before the abduction. Someone was learning that neighborhood, learning it well enough to exploit its geography. But even the most careful planning can be undone by a single unexpected witness. A person who happened to look out their window at the right moment. A driver who passed through the area and noticed something odd. An insomniac scrolling through their phone who heard a sound outside. This is why Annie Guthrie's decision to map out the suspected route and share it publicly was so crucial. It turned every resident along that path into a potential witness. It prompted people to check cameras they might not have thought about, to review footage they might have deleted, to come forward with information they might not have realized was relevant. And it's why the continued appeal for information remains so important. Somewhere, someone might have a piece of this puzzle, a fragment of video, a passing observation, a vehicle they noticed that seemed out of place. Because here's what we know for certain. Nancy Guthrie didn't vanish into thin air. Someone took her, someone transported her, and someone knows what happened after 2:29 a.m. on January 31st. The medical device disconnection at that precise time haunts investigators. For Nancy's family, it represents a moment when everything changed, when their mother, their grandmother, went from missing to something worse. Because that device was monitoring Nancy's heart, its sudden silence suggests one of several scenarios, none of them offering hope. The device could have been forcibly removed, which would require someone to physically access Nancy's body. It could have been destroyed or jammed electronically, though that would require equipment and knowledge that suggests premeditation. Or it could have stopped transmitting, because the heart it was monitoring stopped beating. Nancy's health was fragile. She needed medication daily. Her heart condition was serious enough to require constant monitoring. In the 80-plus days since her disappearance, she has been without that medication, without her monitoring device, without the medical care she desperately needed. The investigation continues. Federal authorities are involved, bringing resources and expertise that local departments might not have. The video review is ongoing, with analysts examining footage frame by frame, looking for anything that might identify a vehicle or a person. Digital forensics experts are extracting every bit of data from vehicles, phones, and devices connected to the case. And investigators are following up on tips that continue to come in from the public. But time is not on Nancy Guthrie's side. Every day that passes without answers is another day her family endures not knowing. Another day the trail grows colder. Another day that critical evidence might degrade or be lost. Which is why cases like this need attention, need people asking questions, need viewers like you who refuse to let these stories fade into the background. If you care about finding answers for Nancy Guthrie and her family, hit that subscribe button for revealing untold crimes right now. We'll continue bringing you updates on this case and others that demand justice. Your subscription, your like, your share, all of it helps keep these stories in the spotlight where they belong. When an 84-year-old woman vanishes from her home in the middle of the night, every piece of evidence matters. Every camera angle, every witness statement, every theory, no matter how unconventional. But what happens when the people closest to the victim, the ones who know her routines and her neighborhood better than anyone, offer critical information that investigators seem reluctant to accept? This is the paradox at the heart of the Nancy Guthrie investigation. A daughter provides a detailed map of what she believes is her mother's abduction route. That map identifies specific businesses, specific intersections, specific camera locations. Yet 88 days into this investigation, questions remain about whether that information was acted upon quickly enough or thoroughly enough. The resistance of law enforcement to civilian input isn't unique to this case. It's a pattern that has played out in investigations across the country, sometimes with tragic consequences. And it's a pattern that might be costing precious time in the search for Nancy Guthrie. Think back to the Gabby Petito case. A young woman vanished during a cross-country trip with her fiancé, Brian Laundrie. Her parents were frantic, desperate for answers, unable to get any cooperation from Laundrie's family. Law enforcement was investigating. But the breakthrough didn't come from traditional police work. It came from civilians. YouTube sleuths, reviewing their own travel footage, spotted Gabby's white Ford Transit van in dispersed camping area in Wyoming. They recognized it from media coverage and immediately contacted authorities. Not far from where that van was parked, searchers found what remained of Gabby Petito's body. Without those civilian sleuths, without people paying attention and willing to come forward with what they'd seen, Gabby might never have been found. The case might still be unsolved. Brian Laundrie might never have been identified as the person responsible for her death. So why do trained investigators so often discount theories and tips from family members and concerned citizens? There's an inherent bias in law enforcement, born from years of experience dealing with emotional families and well-meaning but mistaken witnesses. Investigators see the panic, the desperation, the overwhelming need to do something, anything. And sometimes they dismiss valuable information because of where it's coming from, rather than evaluating it on its merits. In Nancy Guthrie's case, that bias may have cost critical time. From the very beginning, Annie Guthrie was in her mother's house, telling investigators there was absolutely no chance Nancy had wandered off. She explained that her mother could barely walk 50 yards under her own power. She pointed to the eyeglasses left behind, the cell phone, the medications, the walker, the shoes. Every piece of evidence screamed that Nancy Guthrie had not left voluntarily. Yet, in those crucial first hours, the investigation was treated as an elderly person who had wandered away. Resources were allocated accordingly. Search patterns were designed around that theory. Time was lost, and now, 88 days later, we're still asking the same fundamental questions. Where is Nancy Guthrie? Who took her? And why hasn't a suspect vehicle been identified? The route map that Annie Guthrie provided early in the investigation wasn't a random guess. Annie lives in the same area as her mother. She knows these streets. She knows the traffic patterns, the shortcuts, the routes people actually use versus the routes that appear on a GPS. When she sat down and drew out what she believed was the most likely escape route, she was drawing on intimate knowledge of that neighborhood. And what's on that route? Lulu Walker Elementary School, with its multiple security cameras positioned at every corner of the building. Green Toe's North Nail Salon, with a surveillance camera clearly visible at the front of the structure, positioned to capture both the parking lot and the street. Circa 79 Salon, a large commercial space of over 3,000 square feet that was recently renovated by retail specialists. That last detail matters more than it might initially seem. When a commercial property undergoes professional renovation, especially one handled by a major firm like Cushman & Wakefield, modern security systems are typically part of the upgrade. High-definition cameras, digital recording systems, coverage of entry points, and parking areas. These aren't old, grainy security feeds. These are systems designed to capture usable footage. But renovation also creates a window of vulnerability. During construction, cameras come down, wiring gets rerouted, systems go offline, and they're often the last thing reinstalled once the renovation is complete. The question investigators need to answer is whether Circa 79's cameras were operational on January 31st at approximately 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the morning. Each location on Annie's map represents not just a camera, but an intersection, a point where a vehicle would have to slow down or stop. And that's critical, because a vehicle in motion, especially at night, is hard to capture clearly on camera. But a vehicle slowing for a stop sign or a red light, that's a different story. Think about the Brian Koberger case, the University of Idaho murders. Investigators were looking for a white Hyundai Elantra that had been spotted near the crime scene. They didn't catch it from one camera angle going full speed down a highway. They pieced together multiple sightings from multiple cameras, each one capturing the vehicle as it slowed for intersections, as it made turns, as it navigated through residential areas. Those multiple data points, those moments when the vehicle had to slow down, created a pattern that ultimately led to Koberger's identification. The same principle applies here. Annie Guthrie's route includes multiple points where any vehicle traveling that path would have to slow. The intersection at Green Toes North, where the route meets a major thoroughfare. The turns near circa 79. The approach to Lulu Walker Elementary. At each of these points, cameras should have captured something. A vehicle description, a partial license plate, even just a color and body style. But there's another piece of evidence that emerged from analysis of Annie's route, a detail that might answer one of the most puzzling questions in this entire investigation. Remember the vehicle that was spotted on a Ring doorbell camera about 2.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home? It was on a back road, away from the main scene. When that footage first surfaced, law enforcement dismissed it as irrelevant. But when Annie's proposed route is overlaid on a map of the area, something interesting happens. That back road, the one where the Ring camera caught a vehicle in the early morning hours of January 31st, doesn't appear on Annie's map. She didn't identify it as part of the main escape route, but it's in the same general area. It fits as a possible alternate route, a way to avoid the main intersections and their cameras while still moving away from Nancy's neighborhood. This raises an important question. If Annie provided this detailed route based on her knowledge of the area, what made her choose these specific streets? What information did she have that led her to believe this was the path her mother's abductor would take? And more importantly, where did she think they were taking Nancy? Because a route isn't just about getting away from a crime scene. It's about going toward a destination. If investigators can determine where this route leads, they might be able to narrow down search areas. They might be able to identify properties or locations where someone could hold or hide an elderly woman who requires daily medication and medical monitoring. The fact that no large-scale search has been organized is puzzling to many following this case. No call for volunteers to spread out across the desert terrain shoulder to shoulder. No deployment of horses and ATVs to cover the vast stretches of undeveloped land surrounding the residential areas. No public appeal from Savannah Guthrie, Nancy's niece, and a national television personality to mobilize thousands of volunteers. The absence of these searches suggests one of two things. Either law enforcement doesn't believe Nancy is in the immediate area and that searching the desert would be futile, or they have information that hasn't been made public, information that has led them to focus their efforts elsewhere. But without access to the initial 911 call, without knowing exactly what Annie Guthrie and her husband reported when they first discovered Nancy was missing, it's impossible to know what direction the investigation took in those critical first hours. Was there an initial suspect? Did something at the scene point investigators in a specific direction? The answers to these questions might explain why certain leads were pursued and others weren't. What we do know is that fresh eyes are now reviewing the evidence. Federal investigators have been brought in to take another look at everything. The surveillance footage from the Uber driver who picked up Nancy that evening, the data from Annie's blue Honda CR-V, the doorbell camera footage from Nancy's front porch, the thousands of hours of video collected from businesses and residences along potential escape routes. This kind of fresh review isn't an admission of failure. It's smart investigative work. When you've been looking at the same evidence for weeks, patterns can become invisible. Details get overlooked, not because of incompetence, but because of familiarity. A new investigator, someone who hasn't been living and breathing this case every day, might notice something that's been hiding in plain sight. It's the same principle that makes cold case units so effective. Detectives who weren't emotionally invested in the original investigation, who don't have preconceived theories about what happened, can approach evidence with genuine objectivity. They ask different questions. They challenge assumptions. They follow threads that might have been dismissed the first time around. But while fresh eyes review old evidence, new theories have emerged, and not all of them fit with the physical evidence that's been documented. A theory was recently proposed by a well-known psychologist suggesting that Nancy Guthrie might have been kidnapped or killed at a different location, and that her abductor returned to her home to stage the scene. According to this theory, the blood found on Nancy's front porch wasn't deposited there during the actual crime. It was brought back and placed there deliberately to mislead investigators. The theory suggests a level of sophistication involving multiple perpetrators, a mastermind directing operations from a distance, and a foot soldier carrying out the actual abduction. The motive, according to this theory, might be that Nancy knew something, some piece of information that someone wanted silenced. It's an intriguing theory from an intelligent source, but does it hold up against the physical evidence? The blood spatter on Nancy's front porch isn't just a smear or a puddle. It's a specific pattern, large droplets roughly the size of a nickel mixed with much smaller satellite droplets. This kind of pattern doesn't happen when someone pours or places blood. It happens when blood is expelled from the nose or mouth, either through coughing, choking, or the impact of trauma. If you look closely at the photographs that were taken of Nancy's porch, you can see individual drops where the center is clear or shows a half-moon shape. That's characteristic of blood that had air mixed with it when it was expelled. You cannot recreate that pattern by transferring blood from one location to another. You cannot stage it convincingly, even if you tried. For this staging theory to work, Nancy's abductor would have had to collect her blood, transport it back to her residence, and then somehow recreate the exact spatter pattern that results from expirated blood. The level of forensic knowledge and the specific equipment that would require makes the theory implausible at best. And there's another problem with the staging theory: Nancy's medical monitoring device. The device connected to her pacemaker that was tracking her heart activity disconnected at 2:29 in the morning. That's approximately 1 hour after the figure appeared at her door on the doorbell camera. The device places Nancy at or very near her residence during that time window. If she had been taken somewhere else and killed, then brought back for staging, that timeline doesn't work. The physical evidence points to something happening at Nancy's home during that 1 hour window between 1:27, when the doorbell camera activated, and 2:29, when her medical device went offline. What happened during that hour is the question that haunts this investigation. But the idea that nothing happened at her home and that the scene was staged later contradicts too much of what the evidence shows. This doesn't mean the theory is completely without value. Even theories that don't pan out can serve a purpose in an investigation. They force investigators to ask questions they might not have considered. They challenge assumptions. They open new lines of inquiry. A theory about a mastermind and a foot soldier might be wrong about the staging, but it could be right about there being multiple perpetrators involved in the planning and execution. What the theory does highlight is that this abduction showed signs of sophisticated planning. The multiple reconnaissance visits to Nancy's home, the knowledge of her schedule and vulnerabilities, the ability to avoid camera detection for 88 days. These elements suggest someone who thought through multiple scenarios and had contingency plans. But sophistication in planning doesn't necessarily mean multiple people. A single determined individual with time to prepare, familiarity with the area, and knowledge of surveillance systems could potentially pull off what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The question isn't just how many people were involved. It's what motivated someone to target this particular 84-year-old woman. And that question has led to speculation about Nancy's family connections. Her daughter is married and lives in the area, but her niece is Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognized faces in American television news. Was Nancy targeted because of that connection? Was this about money, either ransom or some kind of extortion? Was it about sending a message to Savannah or to the broader Guthrie family? 88 days in, no ransom demand has been made public. No communication from the abductor. No explanation for why Nancy Guthrie was taken. And that silence is perhaps the cruelest aspect of this entire nightmare for her family. Meanwhile, the investigation itself has been complicated by administrative issues that have nothing to do with the actual case. The Pima County Sheriff, the official overseeing this investigation, is facing potential removal from office over separate matters involving allegations of misconduct and misuse of authority during an election year. A county council gave the sheriff a 10-day deadline to respond to questions about his conduct. Instead of providing sworn testimony, he submitted a written response through his attorney, essentially a list of explanations for his behavior that wasn't made under oath, and therefore carries no legal weight. Now the council has to decide whether to bring him back in, put him under oath, and go through the entire process again, or whether the insufficient response itself is grounds for removal. It's a technicality, but technicalities can end careers. And if the sheriff is removed mid-investigation, what happens to the Nancy Guthrie case? A new sheriff would come in and potentially want to start fresh, review every decision that's been made, question every lead that's been followed or not followed. That could mean weeks or months of delay while the new administration gets up to speed. It could mean critical evidence review gets pushed back. It could mean witnesses who were willing to talk become harder to locate or less willing to cooperate. On the other hand, new leadership might be exactly what this investigation needs, because the current sheriff has made statements throughout this case that have raised eyebrows among experts and observers. Early on, he suggested that Nancy might still be alive, being held somewhere. Most experts in geriatric medicine and kidnapping cases find that scenario highly unlikely given Nancy's age, her medical needs, and the length of time she's been missing. He made claims about traffic volume in the area at the time of the abduction that don't match with what local residents know about those streets in the middle of the night. He stated that investigators' guesses about what happened were as good as anyone's, a comment that suggested either a troubling lack of direction in the investigation or a communication failure with the public. These statements have eroded confidence in the investigation among those following the case closely. But removing a sheriff midstream also carries risks. Defense attorneys in any future prosecution would have a field day with the chaos and administrative turnover. They'd argue that evidence was mishandled, that the chain of custody was broken, that incompetence pervaded the investigation from day one. And they wouldn't be entirely wrong. The crime scene at Nancy's home wasn't properly secured. Media members were able to walk right up to the front porch and photograph blood evidence before it had been processed and documented by forensic teams. That's an inexcusable failure of basic crime scene protocol. Those photographs, now public, are the only detailed images of that blood spatter that exist outside of official evidence files. A pizza delivery driver, a pool maintenance worker, random passers-by, all had access to what should have been one of the most protected pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. That failure will echo through any trial that results from this case. It's the kind of mistake that gets mentioned in opening statements, closing arguments, and appeals. It's the kind of mistake that defense attorneys use to create reasonable doubt, by arguing that if investigators couldn't even secure a crime scene properly, how can the jury trust anything else about their work? But here's what hasn't been lost: the digital evidence. And that might be what ultimately solves this case. The FBI controls the timeline now, not the perpetrator, not the local sheriff's office, not the media, not public pressure. The FBI has unlimited resources and unlimited time to work through every frame of video, every byte of data, every piece of digital evidence connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. They can enhance video that local investigators might have dismissed as too dark or too grainy. They can extract data from vehicle computers that require specialized equipment and expertise. They can cross-reference cell tower pings, financial transactions, social media activity, and 1,000 other digital breadcrumbs that modern life leaves behind. If there's a digital trail that leads to Nancy Guthrie's abductor, the FBI will find it. It might take months, it might take years, but they have the tools and the patience to follow evidence wherever it leads. What they need from the public is continued vigilance. continued willingness to review old footage, to report anything suspicious, to come forward with information no matter how insignificant it might seem. Because cases get solved by tiny details as often as by major breakthroughs. A vehicle someone noticed parked in an unusual spot. A person seen walking in the neighborhood at an odd hour. A social media post that seems off in hindsight. The reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery is now over $1.2 million. And critically, you don't need an arrest to claim that reward. You don't need a conviction. You just need to provide information that leads to finding Nancy Guthrie. That's an unusually generous reward structure, designed to encourage people who might be afraid of retaliation or who don't want to get involved in a prosecution to still come forward. If you know something, if you think you might know something, if you saw anything in the Fountain Hills area in the early morning hours of January 31st, or in the days leading up to it, contact authorities immediately. Call the tip line at 800-225-5324. That's 800-225-5324. Or if you want to remain anonymous, call 520-882-7463. That's 520-882-7463. Your information could be the piece that breaks this case wide open. Your phone call could bring Nancy home. Your willingness to come forward could give the Guthrie family the answers they desperately need. Because underneath all the investigative missteps, all the administrative drama, all the theories and speculation, there's a simple human truth. An 84-year-old woman is missing. A mother, a grandmother, an aunt, a woman who needed daily medication to keep her fragile heart beating. A woman who couldn't walk more than 50 yards without assistance. A woman who depended on the kindness and protection of others. And someone took her. Someone violated the most basic human decency. Someone looked at a vulnerable elderly woman and saw not a person deserving of care and respect, but a target, an opportunity, a means to an end. Whatever that end was, whatever motivated this abduction, Nancy Guthrie deserves to be found. Her family deserves answers, and whoever did this needs to face justice. The investigation continues. The evidence review continues. The search continues, and it will continue until Nancy Guthrie is found, and until the person responsible is held accountable. If this case matters to you, if you want to stay updated on every development, make sure you're subscribed to Revealing Untold Crimes. Hit that subscribe button right now. Give this video a like so more people see it and learn about Nancy's case. Share it with anyone who might have been in the Fountain Hills area or who might have information. Every share extends the reach of Nancy's story. Every view keeps her case in the public eye, and public attention matters in cases like this. It keeps pressure on investigators. It keeps tips coming in. It keeps hope alive. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 88 days. 88 days without her medication. 88 days away from her family. 88 days of questions without answers. But the investigation isn't over. Fresh eyes are reviewing the evidence. Federal resources are committed to finding the truth. And somewhere in the thousands of hours of surveillance footage, somewhere in the digital data, somewhere in the information that hasn't come to light yet, there are answers. Those answers are out there, and they will be found. Justice for Nancy Guthrie is coming.